You're standing on a dock in a quiet boatyard, staring up at a 37-foot hull that looks like the answer to every tired Monday you've ever lived through. The teak glows, the broker smiles, and somewhere below the waterline, a bill with your name already on it is quietly ticking. Here's what I found. Buying a used cruising sailboat is the only honest way in, but 3 of the 5 boats everyone keeps recommending will slowly eat your retirement, and only 2 of them are worth every dollar you'll spend. I've crawled the bilges myself, read the surveys line by line, and followed the invoices all the way to where the money actually disappears. Before we're done, I'll show you how 4 little characters stamped into the back of almost every hull can tell you whether the boat you're about to buy came out of a poisoned production run, the kind that blistered from the inside out, between 1976 and 1981. I remember kneeling in the aft bilge of a Valiant in a yard outside Anacortes, running my thumb across blisters the size of quarters, while the seller stood above me swearing it was, quote, just cosmetic. It was not cosmetic. And the story of how that boat got that way is the story of why you must never, ever buy new. Let me start with the single number that should make every glossy new boat brochure illegal. A brand new production cruiser loses somewhere between 40 and 50% of its value in the first 10 years. You can spend $300,000 on a shiny new 40-footer, sail it for a decade, and watch half of that money evaporate while you were busy paying slip fees. That is not an investment. That is a slow leak with a teak interior. But here is the part almost nobody says out loud. A fiberglass hull, laid up properly, will outlive the man who buys it. The good yards were building hulls in the 1970s and 80s that are still crossing oceans today, 50 years later, with the original fiberglass sound and strong. So the depreciation that destroys the first owner is the exact thing that hands you the deal. Somebody else ate the worst 40%. Somebody else paid for the shakedown, the warranty fights, the first round of upgrades. And they did it so you don't have to. That is why the honest way in is secondhand only, not as a compromise, as a strategy. Now somebody profited from the fact that you were never told this clearly. The whole aspirational machine, the lifestyle channels, the sunset photos, the boat show financing tables is built to move new inventory because that is where the biggest checks get written. Nobody makes a commission telling you to go buy a 35-year-old hull for 60 grand and sail it for another 30 years. So they don't tell you. That silence has a price, and you're about to see exactly what it costs, and if you want the full breakdown in your hands before we go any further, there's a book for that. I've put everything I've dug up the documented blister years, the deck core failure patterns, the rigging clocks, the hull identification number decoder, and the real total cost math on all 5 of these boats into a digital book. It's called True Cost, and it's available in the description below. If you're serious about buying a used cruising sailboat and you don't want to learn these lessons at the dock with your own money, that's where you go. Deepwater and Cast-Off are also there if you want to go further down the case file. Read it before you talk to a single broker. Now, with that resource in your back pocket, let me walk you through the 5 boats, one exhibit at a time. The first boat is the one that lures almost every American man into the water, and it's the Catalina 30. Between 1972 and the early 2000s, Catalina built more than 6,600 of them. 6,600! That is one of the most produced fiberglass sailboats in history, and that alone tells you something. They're everywhere. They're cheap, and you can find a saleable one for $12,000 to $25,000 all day long. On the surface, it looks like the perfect, honest first boat, and for a certain buyer, it is. If your dream is weekends on a lake or coastal hops in protected water, the Catalina 30 is a genuinely good, forgiving boat with an enormous parts network and a community that has solved every problem it has. I want to be fair to it, because it deserves fairness. But here's the trap, and it's a trap the low sticker price sets for you personally. The Catalina 30 is a coastal cruiser wearing Bluewater dreams. The rudder is a spade rudder on a stock that has been known to develop cracks and water intrusion, and a rudder rebuild or replacement will run you $2,000 to $4,000 once you factor in the haul out. The original atomic 4 gas engine, if it still has one, is a fire and reliability liability that pushes people into a repower. And a diesel repower dropping a new engine into an old boat is not a $2,000 job. Depending on the yard, a proper repower runs $15,000 to $25,000 once you count the engine, the mounts, the shaft alignment, the wiring, and the labor. So the $12,000 boat becomes a $30,000 boat the moment you decide you actually want to trust it offshore. That's the pattern I want you to start seeing. The purchase price is the down payment on the truth, not the truth itself. Now, the Catalina won't kill you, and it won't bankrupt you if you keep it in its lane. Therefore, the real danger isn't the boat, it's the fantasy you strap onto it. The dream of crossing an ocean in a hull that was designed to see you home before the afternoon sea breeze. And that fantasy gets a lot more expensive on the next boat because the next one actually can cross oceans. It just wants to be paid for the privilege. The second boat is the Tayana 37, and I need you to understand why this one breaks so many hearts. This is a Robert Perry design, one of the most respected naval architects in cruising history, and the Tayana 37 is a genuine, capable, full-keel Bluewater boat. More than 600 of them were built starting in 1976, and they have crossed every ocean on the planet. When you see one listed for $60,000 to $90,000 with a teak deck glowing in the sun, your heart rate goes up. Mine did too, the first time. That teak deck is the murder weapon. Here's what the listing photo never shows you. A teak deck is not a surface. It is thousands of little screws or bungs drilled down into the fiberglass deck below, and every one of those fastenings is a potential path for water. Over 30 and 40 years, those seams open, the caulking fails, and water works its way down under the teak and into the deck core. You don't see it. You walk the deck and it feels solid. But underneath, the wood is silently rotting, and the teak itself has been sanded down over the decades until it's too thin to reseal. I want to give you the number that stops people cold. Removing an old teak deck and properly reglassing and refinishing the deck underneath on a boat this size is routinely a $20,000 to $40,000 job. I've seen quotes push past $50,000 when the core underneath turned out to be saturated. That is a job that can cost more than you paid for the entire boat. So how do you catch it before you sign? You bring a plastic-tipped mallet or even the handle of a screwdriver and you tap. You walk the whole deck tapping every few inches, and you listen. A solid deck rings sharp and hard. A wet, delaminated core answers back dull and flat, like tapping on a wet cardboard box. You do this yourself before you ever pay for a survey, because a survey costs you real money, and this tap test costs you nothing but 10 minutes and a little embarrassment in front of the broker. The Tayana teaches the lesson perfectly. A great design and a great builder do not protect you from a maintenance time bomb that a previous owner ignored for 20 years. Therefore, the question stops being which boat is good and starts being which boat was cared for, and that question has a darker cousin, because some boats weren't just neglected. Some boats were flawed the day they left the factory, no matter how well the owner loved them. That brings me to the boat from the beginning of this story, the Valiant 40. On paper, the Valiant 40 is one of the greatest Bluewater cruising sailboats ever conceived. Robert Perry, again the same designer as the Tayana, drew the Valiant 40 in 1973, and it is considered by many serious cruisers to be the boat that launched the entire performance cruiser category. Fast, strong, sea-kindly, capable of crossing any ocean in the world. One Valiant 40 famously completed a solo circumnavigation. This is a legend, and legends command respect and dollars. You'll see them listed from the high 50s into six figures. But between roughly 1976 and 1981, something went catastrophically wrong at the factory, and it had nothing to do with the design. During those years, the builder used a particular fire-retardant resin in the hull layup. Nobody knew at the time what it would do, but that resin turned out to be chemically unstable in seawater over the long term, and the hulls built in that window developed severe, chronic, incurable blistering. Not the little cosmetic blisters you can grind and fill. Deep, structural, endlessly returning blisters that come back no matter how many times you peel and recoat the hull. Owners in the cruising community gave these boats a name. They call them the blister boats. This is documented. This is not a rumor, a dockside know-it-all told you. The affected hulls were built in a known year range, and the fix, if you can even call it a permanent fix, is to have the entire outer skin of the hull peeled off by machine, dried out for weeks or months, and relaminated with modern epoxy. That is a hull peel. And on a 40-foot boat, you are looking at $15,000 to $30,000, sometimes more, and even then some owners report the blisters coming back. Here's the cruel part. A blister boat Valiant sails exactly as beautifully as a good one. On a test sail, on a sunny afternoon, you would never know. The flaw is invisible below the waterline until the boat is hauled out and you're staring at a hull that looks like it has chicken pox. And a motivated seller will do exactly what the man in Anacortes did to me. He'll stand on the dock and tell you it's cosmetic. Now, if you already own a boat, this next part is for you specifically. So don't drift off, because what I'm about to give you works on the hull you're standing on right now, not just the one you're dreaming about. Here is the check you can do this weekend, without a broker, without a surveyor, without spending a dime. The next time your boat is hauled out, or if you can get to a friend's boat on the hard look at the bottom of the hull below the waterline right after it comes out of the water, before the yard pressure washes it and before it dries. That is the moment blisters are most visible, because they're full of fluid and standing proud of the surface. Run your flat palm slowly across the gel coat. You are feeling for small raised bumps, anywhere from the size of a dime to the size of a silver dollar. If you find a few scattered ones, that's common osmosis, and it's manageable. If you find a rash of them, dozens, clustered, and consistent, you may be looking at the beginning of a hull that will demand a peel. And here's the technique the pros use that almost no amateur knows. Take a small awl or a stiff pick and gently open just one blister. If fluid weeps out and it smells sharp and sour, almost vinegary, that is the signature of active hydrolysis inside the laminate. That smell is evidence. That smell is the hull telling you the resin is breaking down. You can do that test in 5 minutes, and it will tell you more than a glossy listing ever will. For those of you already 3 years into a boat and wondering why your bottom paint keeps failing in the same spots, that's the check that answers the question you've been afraid to ask. So, the Valiant proves the deepest point yet. Reputation is not condition. The most legendary hull ever designed can still be a specific, dated, financial catastrophe if it came out of the wrong years. Therefore, you cannot buy a model, you must buy a hull, a specific hull, with a specific birthday. And I'm going to show you exactly how to read that birthday at the very end, because it's the single most powerful thing I learned in all my digging. But first, let me show you the 2 boats that are actually worth your money, because I don't want you thinking every used boat is a trap. Some of them are the best value on the water. The 4th boat is the Pacific Seacraft, and specifically the Crelock 37. If the Valiator's story is a tragedy of the factory, the Crelock 37 is what happens when a factory refuses to cut corners. This is a William Crelock design, and Pacific Seacraft built it on the West Coast to a standard that most production builders never touched. Hand-laid solid fiberglass hulls, bronze seacocks instead of cheaper fittings. A build quality so consistent that these boats hold their value in a way that quietly destroys the depreciation curve I told you about earlier. And that's the catch. The Crelock 37 barely depreciates. You'll find them from the 80s and 90s listed anywhere from $100,000 to well over $150,000, which for a 37-foot boat of that age sounds insane until you understand why. The market has figured out that these boats don't rot from the inside the way the cheaper ones do. You're not paying for teak and sunset photos. You're paying for a hull that a surveyor will walk through and hand back to you with a short list instead of a mortgage. So, is the higher price a ripoff? No. This is where I have to correct the instinct that cheaper is always smarter. The Crelock 37 is more expensive to buy precisely because it will be cheaper to own. The boat that costs you $60,000 up front and $40,000 in hidden repairs is more expensive than the boat that costs you $110,000 up front and hands you a clean survey. The sticker price and the total cost of ownership are two completely different animals, and the entire aspirational machine is counting on you confusing them. But even a perfect boat has one bill that comes for everyone, and I need to put that number in front of you before we go further, because it applies to every single boat on this list and almost no first-time buyer budgets for it. The standing rigging, the stainless steel wire that holds the mast up, has a service life. The insurance industry and most riggers work on a replacement window of roughly 10 to 15 years for offshore use, regardless of how good the wire looks. Stainless steel fails from the inside through fatigue and crevice corrosion, and it can look perfect right up until the moment it lets go and drops your mast into the sea. Re-rigging a boat in the 35 to 40 foot range runs you somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 once you include the wire, the terminals, the turnbuckles, the labor, and the mast unstepping. So when you look at any used boat, one of your first questions has to be, when was the rig last replaced? If the answer is more than 15 years ago, or worse, if the answer is nobody knows, you must write that check into your offer, $10,000. Right off the top. That is the cost the listing never mentions, and the reason so many owners find themselves shocked in year 2. Therefore, the smart buyer isn't hunting for the lowest price. He's hunting for the boat where the expensive clocks, the rigging clock, the engine clock, the deck core clock have already been reset by somebody else's money. And nowhere is that truer than on the last boat, the one everybody makes fun of and almost nobody understands. The fifth boat is the Westsail 32. Sailors have a cruel nickname for the Westsail 32. They call it the wet snail because it is slow. Heavy, full-keeled, double-ended, and built like a bomb shelter, the Westsail 32 is a descendant of the old Colin Archer rescue boats, and it does not go fast in light air. If you want to win races or make quick passages, this is the wrong boat, and I won't pretend otherwise. But here is what the joke misses entirely. The Westsail 32, built mostly in the 1970s, was constructed with a hull so absurdly thick and overbuilt that these boats are nearly indestructible. We're talking hulls with hand-laid fiberglass an inch thick in places. The Westsail 32 rode a wave of popularity after it appeared in a national magazine story in the 1970s as the boat that could let an ordinary person escape and cross an ocean, and thousands of dreamers bought into that. Many of those boats were never finished, or were owner-completed, so quality varies wildly, and you must inspect each one individually. And the price? This is the honest secret of the whole video. You can find a solid, saleable Westsail 32 for $30,000 to $50,000, a boat that will genuinely safely cross an ocean for the price of a mid-range pickup truck. Because the market punishes it for being slow, you get Bluewater capability at a coastal price. The depreciation that ruins the first owner of a fancy boat has been doing its work on the Westsail for 50 years, and now it works entirely in your favor. So the same forced depreciation that I warned you about at the very beginning is the exact force that hands you the best deal in cruising if you're willing to buy the unglamorous boat instead of the Instagram boat. The villain and the gift are the same mechanism. Somebody decided the Westsail wasn't cool, and that decision put an ocean-crossing hull within reach of a schoolteacher. Now let me tie the whole case together, because everything I've shown you, the Catalina's repower, the Tayana's rotting deck, the Valiant's poisoned resin, the Crelock's clean survey, the Westsail's bargain hull, every single one of these comes down to one question. Not what model is it, when exactly was this specific hull born, and what was happening at that factory in that year. And here is the thing almost no first-time buyer knows how to answer. But you're about to. Every fiberglass boat built for sale in the United States since 1972 is required by federal law to carry a hull identification number. It's a 12-character code, and you'll find it molded into the fiberglass, almost always on the upper starboard corner of the transom, the back right of the boat, up near the top. Sometimes faint, sometimes it's been painted over, but it's there, because the Coast Guard has required it since the Federal Boat Safety Act. And here is the secret buried inside those 12 characters that a broker will never volunteer. The last part of that code contains the boat's actual build date. In the modern format, used since August of 1984, the characters tell you the month and the model year the hull was certified. In the older format used before that, the date was encoded slightly differently, but it is still readable once you know the pattern. The point is this: the transom itself will tell you the truth about the boat's age, and that truth does not always match what the broker typed into the listing. Do you understand what that gives you? Stand at the transom of a Valiant 40 with your phone, read the hull identification number off the fiberglass, decode the build date, and you will know in 60 seconds whether that specific hull came out of the blister boat years between 1976 and 1981 before you spend a single dollar on a survey, before you fall in love, before the seller ever gets a chance to tell you it's just cosmetic. The evidence is molded into the boat. It cannot lie. The builder stamped the confession into the transom 50 years ago, and then everyone forgot how to read it. I found this the way you find most real things, not in a glossy buying guide, but in the Coast Guard's own regulations on hull identification numbers and in the hard-won posts of owners on the cruising forums who learned to decode their own hulls after getting burned. The industry buried this under fantasy and financing tables. A handful of careful owners preserved it, and now you have it. So the next time you walk a dock and a boat steals your heart, do this before anything else. Walk to the back, find those 12 characters molded into the starboard corner of the transom, photograph them, decode the date, cross-check it against the known good and bad years for that model. Then, and only then, do you tap the deck for a wet core, run your palm across the hull for blisters, open one with a pick, and ask when the rig was last replaced. Do those 4 things, and you have done more real investigation than most buyers do before they wire the money. Because here's what this whole case comes down to. The sailing dream isn't a lie. The ocean is real, the freedom is real, and a good used boat bought for the right price is one of the last genuine bargains left in a country where everything else is overpriced. What's a lie is the idea that the price on the listing is the price of the dream. It never was. The real price is written in the resin, in the deck core, in the rigging wire, and in 4 little characters on the transom that nobody taught you to read until now. You're not the kind of man who wires his savings on a smile and a sunset photo. You're the kind who opens the bilge, reads the survey, and follows the invoice to the bottom before he trusts anything. That's the whole reason you made it to the end of this, and it's the reason you're going to buy a boat that carries you across an ocean instead of into debt. So tell me one thing in the comments, and be specific, because I read them and I answer. Which of these 5 would you actually buy, the bargain Westsail that's slow but bulletproof, or the pricey Crelock that never rots? Say which one and say why. I want to see how you think about the trade between sticker price and total cost, because that one instinct separates the buyers who sail from the buyers who bleed. And if you're done being marketed the dream and you want to be handed the evidence instead, come join the buyers who investigate before they trust. That's what this channel is. Next time, I'm opening the case file on the one system that sinks more used boats at the dock than storms ever sink at sea, the failure that happens quietly below the waterline while the owner is asleep 3 slips away. I found the number. It'll change how you look at every through hull you've ever ignored. Don't buy anything until you've seen it. Stay with me a minute longer, because we only scratched the surface. I'm inviting you into the honest harbor, where I take this exact video further, boat by boat. Inside, you can ask me your own questions, and a real person answers. Not a machine. You won't be alone. So many first-time buyers are already in there with me. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. Cancel anytime, 1 click.